Welcome to Work Your Magic with me, your host, Ada. This is a podcast at the intersection of business and spirituality for the soul-led entrepreneur who wants to succeed in alignment and authentically shine. Each week, we will dive deep into all things business while discussing the unconventional path of following your intuition and letting your soul lead the way as you build your legacy. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Work Your Magic podcast. Thank you so much for all the love that you've been showing the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And, I've been sitting with myself over the last few days, really trying to, figure out, all right, so what are the topics that we're going to talk about? What are the conversations that are going to be had on this podcast? In what order should these conversations be had so that they make sense? And obviously, since this is a podcast about spirituality and business, I feel like it just wouldn't make any sense for me to dive into these subjects without really giving you a background on my own experience. So today's episode is going to be all about my spiritual awakening and my spiritual journey since a girl woke up. Okay. I'm not even going to lie to y'all. I'm going to have to be 100% honest. This whole awakening shit, very ghetto, very, very ghetto. And, there's a part of me that wants to be like, don't recommend, 0 out of 0 stars. But I can't lean into that because ultimately, like, my experience and my journey really has been the most profound, the most exhilarating, and the most beautiful part of my life. And it really has molded and shaped me into the dope ass being that I am. So like, I can't really sit here and say that it has been bad, because those moments have really just made me appreciate life in a way that is even really hard to explain. So let's just go ahead and get started and jump right into it, because I have a feeling that this episode's going to be a little long. So I'm just letting you know from now. Ponte cómoda, get your snacks, and let's get started. So what the hell is a spiritual awakening? Okay. So according to our boy Deepak Chopra, an awakening happens when you are no longer living in a dream world where you filter everything through your ego and your focus on the future or the past. Instead, you have an almost simultaneous awareness of your individual self and the connection between that and everything else. So an example that he gives is actually a metaphor of a wave in the ocean. So what he says is that you are the wave and you are also the ocean. So there's this beautiful ability for you to be both separated and connected. So as a wave, you're like separated. You're like, all right, I'm the wave. But then you're connected because a wave is in the ocean. And so that would make you also the ocean. And I hope that example makes sense. But if you're still like, girl, I don't get it. I ain't picking up what you're putting down. So a spiritual awakening really is this profound shift from the external world. So you really being focused on everything outside of you, to you now bringing your internal world into focus. And when I reference your internal world, I mean your own inner realm of your thoughts, feelings, dreams, and imagination. A big disclaimer that I want to give is that an awakened person is not a perfect person. And if you hear anyone on these internet streets saying that, because they're spiritually awakened, now they're perfect, and it's a fucking lie. Please run. Please run, because just because you're awake does not mean you're a perfect person. But anyway, let's continue. So when people think of spiritual awakenings, I think a lot of people like to think of them as, oh, it's a spiritual awakening. It's a beautiful experience. It's like rainbows and butterflies and wow, like this was the moment that my life changed. When in reality, a spiritual awakening really comes from you facing the shit that you've been avoiding. Things like anger, guilt, fear, and grief that have been stored with us since our childhood. And it really is you coming to terms with these experiences. That is going to be the path that will allow you to authentically own your own spiritual journey and really develop yourself spiritually. For a lot of people who don't get to experience a spiritual awakening, that is typically because there's some sort of blockage there. And the blockage there is almost always related to your ego. So it's because either your ego's inflated or it's deflated. So if your ego is inflated, it means that you have a feeling of superiority. Y'all, the bilingual, y'all are going to get this like, bilingual butchering of words on this podcast. So I hope y'all get used to that. It comes from this godlike quality. That's like your ego being inflated. When your ego's deflated, it feels small, less than, and inferior. And that typically leads to depression, anxiety, envy, or hate. So these are some of the primary blocks to people's spiritual awakening that won't allow them to have this experience. And ultimately, a spiritual awakening comes down to self-awareness and consciousness. Is you becoming more aware about yourself, going deeper within yourself, which allows you to expand your consciousness. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with the dark night of the soul, but the dark night of the soul tends to be the beginning of the awakening for a lot of people. So Eckhart Tolle describes the dark night of the soul as a collapse of a perceived meaning in life, an eruption in your life of a deep sense of meaninglessness. And so that sometimes can be triggered by a few things. The first thing it could be triggered by is some external event, something that happens outside of you. An example of that could be the death of someone close to you, especially if it's a premature death. Sometimes it's triggered by you realizing that the things that you thought mattered actually don't. An example of that is you building up your life and you giving it meaning, right? So you do everything that society tells you to do. You go to school, you go to college, you get married, you have kids, and then you do all that shit. And it comes to a point where you realize that all the meaning that you gave your life, your activities, your achievements, where you were going, the things that you were going to do with your life, the places, the people, all the things that you considered important, for some reason, all of that collapses when you realize that that shit really doesn't matter. That shit doesn't make you happy. All the things that you thought that were going to like make you feel so fulfilled because society told you, you do it and you realize that it's literally meaningless. It doesn't matter. Now, this is not the case for everyone, right? Like everyone's dark night of the soul is not necessarily tied to like the death of someone or them realizing like that everything in their life is meaningless. Many people experience their spiritual awakening simply by discovering a truth about themselves or developing a curiosity in spirituality and really wanting to know more. Almost like there's this thirst for like more knowledge and you start to go down the spiritual rabbit hole because you want to gain more information. So when it comes to my journey, my experience, my dark night of the soul, for me, my spiritual awakening began when I lost someone really important to me. And it was definitely a premature death. So when I was 19 years old, I moved back to New York because, as most of you guys know, I'm from New York. My mom moved us to Florida when I was fairly young. I would always come back in the summers to visit, but when I graduated high school, I went away to college for about a year and ultimately realized that like New York was the place that I needed to be. So after being in college in Miami for a year, I packed up all my shit and I moved to New York with really no plans. I just felt like I just needed to be there for the type of life and career that I wanted to have. And so when I moved back to New York, I met this guy named Art. His name was Arturo, but his nickname was Art for short. And he actually worked with my brother. They worked at a T-Mobile store in Washington Heights. And him and my brother were friends. When I moved back to New York, I didn't have any friends. So I would always hang out with my brother and his friends and my brother and his coworkers because I didn't have any friends. And so me and Art just started to develop a friendship naturally. He was very funny, very charismatic, and I didn't really have anybody other than my brother in New York. I didn't have any friends. So it was really nice to be able to like have someone to talk to, have someone that I can lean on as I was really I was only 19, really trying to figure my life out. And I was on my own. Like it wasn't like I moved back to New York with like all this savings and like I was living this life. No, like I was really struggling trying to figure it out. I was living in a room with my brother in an apartment that he rented. Like my brother had 2 other roommates and he was renting a room, and I lived with my brother inside of a room until I was able to, you know, get on my own feet and eventually get a job and figure it out. So let's just say that like Art was just somebody that was just always there for me. And naturally our friendship progressed into, you know, him starting to like me, and then me being like, oh my God, could this be more? And eventually we started dating. So we dated for about 2 years, and it was like he was my first love, like the first person that I ever really was able to let my guard down, because I just had gone through so many experiences as a teen that really kind of closed my heart up. I remember the first time that he kissed me, I ran away because I was like, wait, what is this? Feelings? You like me? Emotions? Like, I don't do this. I think I might have to do like just a whole nother podcast episode about Art, especially because this year marks his 10-year anniversary since he passed. And so there's just like a lot coming up for me this year. But anyways, Art passed, you know, he lost his battle to depression, and it was just the first time in my adult life, I was 22 when he passed, that I experienced someone close to me passing that I was like aware, because my dad died when I was 5, but you know, I was 5, so I didn't really remember. So, you know, it's just really hard to explain, like when someone is here and then the next day they're not. And because of the way that he passed, you know, it was suicide. It was just really heavy and really, I mean, it's been 10 years and I still think about him, and it just brings tears to my eyes because he was just such a beautiful person. And I'm so grateful for the 2 years that I had with him. And so when he passed, if you guys know me, or for those of you that don't know me, I'm someone who's really like optimistic, very happy-go-lucky, very positive Patty vibes and energy. And so I remember the weeks after he passed, like every single day I would wake up, and as I would open my eyes, and like it would sink in that like, oh shit, like he's not here, like this is my reality. He passed. I just wish that my bed would swallow me into like a black hole. Like every single day I would wake up and I'm like, oh my God, I just wish that this bed would swallow me. Like, I don't want to be here. Like, what's the point of life? Like, this is just like, this is horrible. This is just like the worst thing ever. And when I started to feel like that consecutively, and because that's not like me, that's not my nature, I just knew that I had to get help. I'm like, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with my life. I just know that I don't want to feel like this every day. I don't want to deal with, not that I didn't want to deal with the pain and hurt, but like it was just too much. So luckily, you know, when I was a teen, I was familiar with therapists because I did have the opportunity to get a few therapy sessions when I experienced, you know, some family things as a teen. So I'm glad that I didn't have necessarily that stigma when it comes to therapy. And this was back in 2012, y'all, when therapy like wasn't cool, when people weren't talking about their therapist online, how people are talking about it now. So, you know, at the time I had insurance for my job. I went online. I found an amazing Latina therapist. I had my first visit with her, and like I just felt like we were a good fit. And I've actually been with her for the last 10 years on and off. But that was like the beginning of my spiritual awakening. That was my dark night of the soul. When Art passed, I just, like, nothing made sense to me. Like everything in my life felt so like meaningless. At the time, I was working a really good job. I was 22 years old, working in Midtown Manhattan at an accounting firm and a / venture capital firm. And I was making like $900 a week after taxes, like the most money that I had ever made in my life up until that point. My boss had a driver that would like drive me around the city to like, if I needed to go to Office Depot to get office supplies, like the driver would be downstairs in his Benz and he would take me to Office Depot. And I remember like getting out of the car and people on the side, like, cause he would come out of the car to open the door for me. And I would always go to work like super dressed up. And I remember like people just staring at me on the sidewalk, like, who is she? Like, she looks important, but I don't really like know who she is. And so like, that was a life that I was living at 22 years old. And when art passed, like everything in my life just became so meaningless. Like I used to hate going to work every single day because ultimately as a creative person, working in an accounting firm, like I don't even like math. I don't like numbers. Like that shit started to become like really boring for me. I just felt like it was sucking the energy out of me every single day. And even though I was making all this money, I was just like over it. I was working so many hours that I couldn't even enjoy all the money that I was making. I felt like I was in a box as a creative. And I remember like I went to work one day and I just asked my boss, like, can we have a meeting? And I just flat out told him like, look, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, I feel like I'm in a box. I told him like everything that I was feeling. And he was like, I know you're going through a lot right now because you just lost somebody that you love. So I know that you're just saying this because of like the emotional state that you're in. And that shit made me so mad because it wasn't just like a temporary feeling. It was really me starting to realize that like all this shit was fucking meaningless. Like this idea of like, oh, I have a great job. I'm working Midtown Manhattan. I'm getting my college degree. Like, all of it just felt so like meaningless. And I just knew that I wanted to change. And so when you're experiencing a spiritual awakening, you start to get an awareness of the present moment and what's going on and happening in your life. And it's typically followed by an impulse to change something. So for me, it was like, I realized how fragile life was. I realized that even though I was making a lot of money in this job, like I wasn't happy, and I had an impulse to like want to change something, to want to change my life. I'm like, there has to be more to life than this. Like life can't just be about getting a degree and going to work and making money and doing that shit over. Like this just can't be it. And when you lose someone in such a tragic way, honestly, when you lose someone that you love in any way, it really shows you how fragile life is. And for me, like losing art was such a huge like push to like, girl, you only have one life. Like, is this how you want to spend the rest of your life living? Like, no, the answer was no. So through that experience, I started to let go of just like any attachments that I had. I started to let go of the way that I was defining myself. So like before, I remember I used to take a lot of pride in being able to say that like I had this like job in Midtown and like, that I was going to school to get my degree and all these things. I remember I was working like 60 hours a week and going to school full time. And I was working so much that I was like failing on my classes, and it was just a fucking mess. So I really started to let go of all those things. Like the titles don't matter. The degrees don't matter. Like none of this shit matters. And I actually ended up quitting and leaving that job and taking a part-time job so that I can just finish school, because I really, at that point, I know school's not for everybody. College is not for everybody, but I really love to learn. And more than anything, I really wanted to like, get my degree for me. It was more for me. It wasn't about like society telling me that I needed to. It was just something that I wanted to do for me. So I just kind of focused on going back to school. I left that job, and ultimately, I just had a big ego death. So that's also part of your spiritual awakening. So there's an ego death, and your ego is exclusively focused on the outer world. So that's work, money, achievement, family, your friends, your social life. these are all of the elements of the external environment. So you have an ego death, and then there's an opportunity for your true self to be reborn. Your true self is more connected to spirit. It's more connected to source. It's more connected to God, whatever higher power you believe in. And it really allows you to locate the authority within yourself. So now you're navigating life from this new lens, this new perspective. It's not about the external world. It's about the internal world. There's a growing sense of responsibility for your thoughts, your feelings, your behavior. And as you experience and you're going through your awakening, you start to see that you have less of a resistance to like feeling your feelings. Even the negative emotions that you've resisted before in the past, you really start to be like, you know what? I'm just going to sit with this shit because it's coming up for a reason. And typically, a lot of us in the past, what we would do is we would numb ourselves out and run away from our feelings. When you start to go through a spiritual awakening, if you really want to make it to the other side, you have to stop running away from your feelings. You really start to develop a willingness to confront your emotions like fear, anger, and guilt. And with our passing, like, I was just like, all right, like, I need to really, like, I need to get help. And that's where therapy came in. And mental health was just something that was always prevalent in my life. Depression, just all of those things. And then losing someone to depression. I was just like, what's going on here? What is the pattern? What are the themes? Like, why is this happening to me? Like, why am I constantly surrounded by depressed people? Like, what is happening? And so I was just, after experiencing such a loss like that, I was just really trying to get to the bottom of all of this and really like stop running away from my feelings and stop numbing myself out and finally get to the root of all of these emotions that I really had been avoiding for all of my life. So in doing that, what happens is that I started to become more authentic within myself. I started to become more authentically human because now I'm honoring my emotions and I'm feeling my feelings more deeply and more genuinely. So now that you have a little bit more backstory on my own spiritual awakening, I want to talk about some of the effects that start to happen when you start to awaken. So the biggest thing I will say is that your intuition heightens and these coincidences start to happen. And it's so important for you to really become aware and start to pay attention. And it's sort of like these little breadcrumbs that you'll start to piece together. The best advice I can give you is try not to like hold on to everything so tightly. Like, I know for me, I started to see like the number 11 everywhere. And then I started to research, well, what does that mean? And ultimately, like when I see the number 11, it's always been like a personal connection that Art and I have because it was a number that I would see a lot before he passed and we would have conversations about the number. So I always felt that that was his way of like, acknowledging me, like reminding me that he's always there, that he was proud of me, because I would always see the number like when something like amazing would happen in my life. Opportunities will come my way and things like that. And it would just felt like it was just him reminding me like, hey, I'm here. So you just have to start paying attention to all these little coincidences and all these things that are going to start to happen. Start paying attention to your intuition, start paying attention to your gut feelings and the little nudges that you have about things, about people. Just start to become aware and bring those things to the forefront of your life. I'll share really quickly, like 2 things that kind of happened to me that it's like, what the fuck? But it was really like opportunities for me to dig deeper and to pay attention and to really like connect all the dots and see like my intuition at play and all those things. So the first thing is when Art passed, I don't know why, I just became like more obsessed with Selena. And I think it's because at the time, like her husband, Chris, had released a book and it was like sort of like a memoir that he did about their life together. And I remember there being a chapter in the book where he discussed her funeral and he was kind of recounting like what happened. And there was like a specific line in the book where he said that when he saw her in the casket, all he wanted to do was like crawl into the casket and close it and just like go with her. And like that resonated with me so deeply because I felt the exact same way at Art's funeral. And what's really crazy is that the day of Art's funeral, I'll never forget this. I had a dream and it was just his like white head floating. And I remember he was wearing like his favorite sweater, which was like this striped white and green sweater. And his head is floating and there's just a whole bunch of white light behind him. And I remember like the energy in that dream, it was just so warm. It was so beautiful. It was full of so much love. It was so peaceful. And he came to me in that dream and he was like, hey, I know today's going to be a really, really hard day and I need you to be strong. I'm in a better place. I'm happy. I'm at peace. And I just want you to know that. And I woke up from that dream like obviously really heartbroken that like I was gonna get ready to like go to his funeral, but I had so much peace in my heart because I felt the peace. I felt the happiness. I felt the love that he was experiencing and I felt how happy he was. So it's like, how can I be sad? Like, how can I be mourning this person when they were able to physically like show me and I was able to experience for myself, like how happy he is and how at peace he is. And so that's what really gave me the strength, like the day of his funeral. Are you a soul-led entrepreneur thriving with ease or simply questioning if entrepreneurship was the right choice for you as you struggle doing all the things just to survive day to day in your life and business? Do you want a new way to operate your business and increase yearly profits that actually works? If you're truly ready for real business mastery with ease and an increase in profit, Business Through the Chakras was designed specially to help you get there. Through my signature group coaching program, Business Through the Chakras, I've had the pleasure of helping soul-led entrepreneurs heal their energy blocks, shine authentically as the badass CEOs they've always wanted to become, and master their business strategies. All of this resulted in them tripling their income. You see, my approach is different from other business courses because I intentionally and consciously use the chakras to understand energy blocks and the ways your business is mirroring to you the things you need to heal to become the successful soulpreneur you've always wanted to be. If you're interested in signing up for the next cohort, make sure that you get on the Business to the Chakras waitlist by visiting allthingsada.com. Once again, that is allthingsada.com, and you can find more information about this program in the show notes. So anyways, back to Selena. I was like obsessed with Selena and I ended up having this really crazy dream with her. And I actually went and found this journal that I have where I journaled like for 5 years, sort of like my whole process of like losing art and then like working through my grief. Like it's so crazy. It's like the only one journal that I have that I actually journaled from cover to cover, because I have 50 million other journals that I just write a little bit here, a little bit there. But this is the only journal that I have that is actually filled from cover to cover. And it chronicles like his death and the next 5 years after that. So I'm not going to go into details about the dream with Selena, but basically in the dream, she grabbed my face, and this, I'm reading this legit from my journal. And she looked me in the eyes and she says, everyone has a purpose. There are people put in your life by God for a purpose. And once it's their time to go, it's their time. And you have to let them go. Your purpose is to touch people's lives before you go. And when it's your time, it's your time. Everyone has a purpose. And I woke up from that dream just sobbing because, I mean, there was just so much truth in that. And again, as painful as it was to not have art here, like it was his time to go. That's what that's what he chose, that it was his time to go. And like sitting with that was really hard, and processing that was really hard. But it was just such a beautiful reminder. Another like crazy thing that kind of happened to me during this time was that immediately after Art passed, his aunt Delitza, which is like she's my best friend. Another gift that Art left me was like his family. I'm so close to his family still after all these years. It's been 10 years and I just love and adore his family. And his aunt Delitza, who was a few years older than him, so they were raised like brother and sister, she was obsessed with the Long Island medium. I think it was her way to like cope with the grief and just like ground herself in something. So she would watch the Long Island medium every single day. And I remember watching episodes with her, and for whatever reason, I just felt like I'm going to meet this lady one day. It's like the weirdest thing, but like looking back, that was my intuition, like I guess giving me the heads up. I ended up doing a modeling gig a few months, after Art passed. And I was modeling like some dresses for a company that like made dresses that has like shapewear built in, whatever. It was like on the local news segment. I went right before a class that I had because I was still in college. And when I left, the segment ran over. So I had already missed the class that I was supposed to go to. So I'm like, well, guess I'm not going to school today because I already missed the class. And it just so happened that the modeling gig was in the same studios as the Bethany show, the Real Housewives. I don't know if you guys remember, she had like a primetime show on television, and the gig that I modeled at was in the same studio. So when we left the studios, there was a long line outside of the building for people waiting to come in on the show. And so I figured, since I had already missed school, like, hey, might as well like catch this Bethany show. So I stood in line. The guy, at the front of the door told us that it's kind of like first come, first serve. So once the like stage filled up and all the seats filled up in the set, that's it. They weren't going to let anybody in. So I'm like, oh, well, like, I'll just take my chances. And so I went on the line, and it's so crazy because me and the other woman that was modeling on the show with me ended up being like the last two seats. So we were like sitting all the way in the corner, like just like not in the best seats, but like we got the last two seats. They wouldn't tell us who the special guest was for the show. And the way that they filmed the shows too is really interesting because they film like the last part of the show at the beginning, and then they film the beginning in the middle, and then they film the middle and the end. And so when they finally shared who the guest was, it was the freaking Long Island medium. And when I tell you, I started hyperventilating and shaking and immediately crying because I just knew that she was going to read me, and I knew that Art was going to come through. And the lady sitting next to me who did the modeling gig with me was like looking at me crazy, like, what's wrong with this girl? But I just knew that she was going to read me. And so, to make a long story short, because I know this episode is going to be a little long, she ended up giving me a reading and just sharing some really beautiful messages from Art. And it was just the craziest. Like, what are the odds? Like, what are the freaking odds of all of that happening? Like, me being at the right place at the right time. Like, and I'm really sad because the show is no longer on air. And at one point, like, the clip was actually on YouTube, but I guess since the show's no longer on air, they don't have the clips anymore. And my biggest dream would be to be able to like find the producers. I don't know if they have like the tapes of this show somewhere, but if they could just send me like the actual raw footage of that experience, like, I would forever be grateful. But she was super on point. Everything that she said resonated with me. She even like called out the tattoo that I have. She was like, you have a tattoo of a balloon, like, in his memory. And I sure did have a tattoo. Mind you, like, my sleeve was covered so she couldn't see it. It was just like such a beautiful, profound experience. And like, to know that like Art loved me that much, that he would like send me that message through her in that way. It's like, so like little things like that. And I laugh now because it's like, those things are not little, like, those are very big things that happened to me. But I'm just sharing like the things that were like, wow, like, this is kind of crazy because they were filled with so many little moments. Like I can go through my journal and share with you guys other dreams that I had with art and other like serendipity. I don't know. You know what I'm trying to say. I can share other moments that were just like that. So beautiful, so crazy. So like if I try to explain it to other people, they'll be like, what the fuck? Like, yeah. So little moments like that will start to occur in your life, and just be open, just be aware. You know, once you start to connect the dots, you're going to be so, just like in awe of life and in awe of like how much greater life truly is and how small you've been living and how like micro focus you've been on things when like the reality is like this human experience is just so much bigger than what you can imagine. So I wanted to discuss like what happens after you awaken. I wanted to share more about how my spiritual growth has been over the years since my awakening happened in 2012, and offer you guys like some tips and some things to look out as you awaken and as you start to go through your own process and journey. So one of the really interesting things that happens is that as we grow spiritually, we really stop seeing like opposites as bad. So for example, like we stop holding the tension of opposites within us. So one of the really interesting things that happen as we grow spiritually is that we stop holding the tension of opposites within us. So you really start to see that there's like no good or bad, or it's not black or white or left or right. It's like that tension of like, oh, well, this is the good thing for me to do, or and this is bad for me to do. Like you don't live with that. It just is. And I hope that makes sense. Another thing that's really interesting is that obviously this whole time you've been unconscious about your behavior. Like you've been operating and moving through the world in a very unconscious way. And when you're unconscious to your behavior, there's no accountability. And when there's no accountability, you don't feel guilty about anything that you do. You don't feel guilty about your behavior. And so as you start to awaken and you start to, you know, go on your own spiritual journey, you'll start to see that the guilt that comes from your awakening isn't from someone else shaming you. It's comes from your conscious, and it's really driven by the desire to correct your way of being. So there's a part of you that is just going to crave to like know yourself more intimately and know why is it that you do the things that you do? Why do you think the way that you think? How did you acquire the beliefs that you have, and how can you start to change that? So you're really driven by this deep desire to just pivot in your life. You start to become more highly conscious of your lifestyle choices. So many things that you did before that were normal to you or just like unacceptable to you, things that you just don't do now. And the really interesting thing too is that ethics become a larger driving force over convenience. So instead of you choosing like the easy way to do things, now ethics are at play. So you're like, okay, even though that's the easier way to do things, or that's a shortcut, is that really in alignment with the person that I am or the person that I want to become? So your ethics just are more at the forefront of the decisions that you make, and you choose your ethics over convenience. Your spiritual values begin to be more important. They're not going to replace the values of the material world, but they just start to be more important than the material values that you hold. You no longer have time for drama, gossip, negative energy, people who drag you down. It's like your energy is just not going to tolerate that. You also like don't be having time for small talk, like that surface level shit, that little chit chat. No, we're not doing that no more. You crave a deeper desire to have meaningful conversations and not to just be at the surface level with people. You begin to crave more alone time. You start to honor more peace and quiet in your life. You want to spend more time in nature, because shout out to Mother Nature. She's mad healing, yo. Your preferences in food, books, and movies and music might even change. You'll start to notice that your life starts to slow down And as you slow down, you're able to reflect and you're able to understand your past more. Your mind and your body will probably need more rest and sleep. That's really big. That's really major. And one thing that I want to share with you all is to not to fight it. I know for a long time, I'm like, oh my God, why am I so tired? Why am I sleeping in more? Why am I not waking up earlier? Oh my God, I have to do X, Y, and Z. And I would beat myself up over like all of a sudden just feeling like tired. And ultimately it's like, your body is ascending. Like your vessel, this meat suit that you're carrying around is going through the different symptoms of ascension, of spiritual growth. And it needs more rest. Your mind needs to rest. Your body needs more rest. So honor that and don't beat yourself up about it. But the good thing is that in you slowing down, and you resting and you sleeping more, your mind starts to be more calmer. You have a deeper connection to your emotional state and you start to feel lighter. And it is the best feeling ever. You begin to focus more on your inner experience than your outer environment. So it's no longer like about the shit outside of you, the external world. It really is about your inner experience and your relationship with self. Your true self is now at the wheel and not your ego. And for me, the best part about all of this is that you start to trust life more. You start to surrender more. There's a feeling of like, you know what? Everything might not be perfect, but I'm going to be okay. No matter what happens in my life, everything is going to work out. I'm going to be okay. And it's like you start to unlock this inner freedom within yourself. And that feeling is just the best feeling in the world. The lightness that comes from that inner freedom is unmatched. A big thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is your shadow. You start to honor your shadow more as you go on your spiritual journey. And for those of you that are not familiar with your shadow, right? Or maybe you've heard it before and it's like, oh, it sounds so bad. Or it has bad connotations because it's like shadow, dark, all of those things. That's another conversation for another day. The shadow is the dark side of our personality. It consists of negative human emotions and impulses. So rage, envy, greed, desire, selfishness, the need for power, all of those things are associated with the darker side of being a human, which equates to your shadow. That is your shadow side. So your shadow is everything that we can't see in ourselves. It's a part of ourselves that we either consciously or unconsciously repress and try to hide. And shadow work is so important throughout your journey. I know for a long time, because I'm so happy-go-lucky, I really was not trying to mess with my shadow side, or I was repressing it. I wasn't trying to honor it. Like I wasn't giving it all the same love and attention and affection that I would give my light side, like all the good qualities about me. And it's like, as you go on your journey and you go deeper and deeper within, you start to realize that like, you can't just be honoring the good parts about you, because as a human, you're not just only good. There is a dark side to you as well. And honoring your shadow and doing the shadow work, number one, that shit keeps you humble as fuck, because it reminds you to embrace all parts of yourself, the good and the bad. But I hope you all remember to do this with compassion, because another thing that I've done in the past in my journey has been to beat myself up over my shadow side. And I'm fucking human. I'm not perfect. I mean, we all saw what happened at the Oscars with Will Smith, right? We got to see and experience his shadow. And for us to sit here and only honor the light within us and not honor the darkness, you're going to run into a lot of problems when you do that. So that shadow work and honoring the shadow, honoring the dark side is equally as important as honoring the light. And it's a great reminder that we are not above the human experience and that we cannot pedestal spirituality to bypass doing the work. Point blank, period. I want to close out this episode by sharing that everyone's spiritual awakening is going to look different. Everyone's spiritual journey after they awaken is going to look different as well. And my journey was a fucking rude awakening that I just was not ready for at all. I do not wish that, not even on my worst enemy. The way that my world was shaken up after losing art in such, a premature way, it was really hard. And as I'm reading this journal that I haven't read in a few years, I found this entry, and this was like 2 weeks after he passed. And I wrote, I can cry all day and be depressed because you are no longer here, or I can be grateful to God for putting you in my life, even though it was only for 2 years. I'm extremely grateful to have loved and be loved. And so, again, as hard as that experience was in that moment, and forever and always, I just chose to be in gratitude for that experience. And so I'm sharing that because ultimately, whatever your spiritual awakening looks like, it boils down to your awakening being an invitation for you to move your life out of autopilot so that you can open yourself up to higher vibrations. It's an invitation for you to live life to the fullest. It is a reminder of how powerful your soul is, how different your life could look if you dared to stop living life in safety and stagnation, the stagnation that comes with living life in safety mode. It's an invitation for you to dream big and for you to finally stop making choices based on what everyone else thinks is best for you in your life. I remember when art passed, I stopped blogging for a while because obviously I just needed to process all of that. And during the time that I spent with myself grieving, I would listen to Alicia Keys a lot. I love her. I love her music, and her albums got me through, oh my God, just some of the hardest days as I was, dealing with my grief. And she has an album called The Element of Freedom. And the introduction to that album, she has, I guess, like a poem or a quote that she says at the beginning. And because I listened to that album so much, obviously I would listen to this quote all the time. And this quote is what got me to get back into my blogging and to resume my life, even as hard as it was, because obviously I put it on pause when he passed. And so the intro to the album, she says, and the day came when the risk it took to remain tightly closed in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to bloom. This is the element of freedom. And when I started blogging again, after taking that time off to grief, this was the quote that I used to write a blog post about coming back to blogging and choosing to bloom. And ultimately, I don't know what you're going through at the moment. I don't know if your own spiritual awakening is causing you to want to remain tightly closed because the experience is hard, because the experience is heavy, because it's scary, because you don't know what is coming up ahead for you, and you're so used to being in control, and now all of a sudden your life is totally out of whack and out of control and unpredictable. And it feels safer to remain closed and to pause your life and to not move forward. Ultimately, I decided that the risk it took to remain tightly closed in the bud was more painful than the risk it took for me to bloom. So I decided to bloom and to try to figure it out and to see what all of this meant for me in my life. And this was 10 years ago. And as hard as my awakening was, it has been the catalyst for the life that I'm living now. So, with that being said, I hope that you choose to bloom. I'm gonna leave you guys with an oracle card to close out this session. It's from the Magical Mermaids and Dolphins deck. So the card says, helpful person. Someone wants to help you. Think of whom that might be and initiate contact. I love that this card came up because even though your spiritual awakening can be hard, and again, it looks different for everyone, just know that you're not alone. And the beautiful thing is that the universe will always send people. It will always send helpful people to assist you. And I'm so grateful for all of the people that came into my life as I navigated my awakening and really held my hand through it and were a shoulder to lean on and support that I can count on. So the card says, there's a person who can help you reach your desired outcome. You've probably already thought of whom this person might be, or it could be a new person coming into your life whom you'll soon meet. Be open to receiving help from others. Strong people learn the importance of delegating and working as a team, and this may be a time for you to learn these vital life lessons. So be sure to voice your needs and ask for assistance. With the help of others, you're more able to manifest your divine purpose and desires. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Work Your Magic. Make sure to visit allthingsala.com where you can subscribe to the show, see all the dope ways I'm working my magic, and never miss an episode. While you're at it, if anything in this episode resonated with you, or if you find value in this show, I would greatly appreciate some love in the form of a rating on Apple Podcasts, a link text to your sister, prima, vecina, or business bestie, or a screenshot on social media. This energy exchange would mean so much to me as it helps this passion project continue to grow and reach more soul-led entrepreneurs like you. Also, if you enjoyed this show, you would greatly benefit from my group coaching program, Business Through the Chakras, where I help soul-led entrepreneurs boss up and authentically shine through business strategy and chakra healing. Check out the link in the description or go visit allthingsala.com.